I want to welcome the members to the May meeting of the Dormitory Authority. It's a pleasure to have you all here. It's a beautiful day in the neighborhood, a bit hazy, but it's always a magnificent view even in the rain. And I'm sorry for those of you who can't see it because you're on the other side of the table. I know, I see it tonight.
One day.
We're trying to make this building.
They're going to launch your cool out.
I think that's it before you did. At 4 o'clock in the morning, rearranged it. They did that. They did, but somebody else did. We have an interesting meeting today, brief as regards the financial work that we're going to have to review and make decisions on. The president isn't here, personal family matter, and will not be here for this part of the meeting or part 2 of the meeting, the session that we're going to have. That said, we should get to it. The first order of business is the review and approval of minutes of the April 11 meeting. Have you all had a chance to read those minutes, and are there any recommendations for revisions, corrections? Hearing none, may I have a motion, please, to approve those minutes?
So moved.
Thank you, Sandra. Is there a second? John Johnson, thank you very much. All in favor, please indicate with aye. Aye. As there are none opposed, the motion carries unanimously. The minutes are approved. The Finance Committee report is the next order of business.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Rofsky, Chairman Rofsky.
Yes, we met yesterday afternoon in New York, and Charlie was in Albany after adopting the meeting minutes from the April meeting. We advanced and discussed 2 financing. One was a PIT/sales tax financing. After some discussion, we recommended that be approved at today's meeting. And then we advanced to the New York City Health and Hospitals Corporation financing. And again, after some discussion, we recommend that be approved as well. And that concludes my report, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gerard. Are there any questions for Gerard before we go on to the single approval financing resolutions? And the Vice President?
Good morning. We have one single approval of financing at tab 3. You'll find the personal income tax/sales tax revenue bond summary and staff report. Matt Bergen will be presenting along with bond counsel, co-bond counsel Ken Wong of Clark & Stelzner Wood and Robert James of Gold College James.
Good morning, Matt.
Good morning.
Cam, Robert. Thank you for being here.
Thank you and good morning to everyone. As stated in the credit summary, the state would like the flexibility to issue the proposed bonds under either the sales tax revenue bond program and or the personal income tax revenue bond program. So the board is being asked to authorize the issuance of multiple series of tax exempt and or taxable fixed and or variable rate bonds issued at one or more times with a term of 30 years and an amount not to exceed $2.3 billion, again, under either the sales tax revenue bond program and or the personal income tax revenue bond program. The bonds are to be sold on either a competitive and or negotiated basis under either sales tax or PIT. The mechanics of the 2 programs are very similar. The major difference is the stream of revenues that secures the bonds, sales tax revenue, as opposed to personal income tax revenue. The bonds will be issued for both new money and refunding purposes, and the new money purposes will include capital projects for State University of New York educational facilities, capital projects for the Office of Mental Health, the Office of Persons with Developmental Disabilities, and the Office of Alcoholism and Substance Abuse Services. In addition, there'll be various capital projects under the Dedicated Highway and Bridge Trust Fund, various capital projects under the Consolidated Local Street and Highway Improvement Program, as well as various healthcare grants. The refunding plan calls for the refunding of certain fixed rate bonds that were issued under various programs, including but not limited to the Personal Income Tax Revenue Bond Program, the Service Contract Program, the Mental Health Program, and other state-supported debt programs. The refunding candidates were all issued by the Dormitory Authority, the Economic Development Corporation, the Environmental Facilities Corporation, or the Thruway Authority. In terms of security provisions, if the bonds are issued under the Sales Tax Revenue Bond Program, the bonds will be paid by semi-annual payments made pursuant to a financing agreement between the state and DASNY, and the bonds are secured by a set-aside of approximately 25% of the state's 4% sales tax to be collected pursuant to statute and deposited in the sales tax revenue bond fund. The current debt service coverage ratio for all sales tax credits, the debt there is 4.4 times. If the bonds are issued under the personal income tax revenue bond program, the bonds will be paid by the semi-annual payments made pursuant to the financing agreement between the authority and the state. And we talked about this, but with the recent legislative changes, the bonds are secured by a set-aside of 50% of personal income tax revenues collected pursuant to statute and 50% of the receipts of a new employer compensation expense tax, with both taxes deposited in the revenue bond tax fund. The current debt service coverage for all outstanding PIT debt across all issuers is 3.7 times, and both programs are expected to be rated AA1, AAA, AA+. Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Matt. We'll hold any questions for the rest of the presentation. Who will start, Cam or Robert?
I'll start. As Matt mentioned, there would be two supplemental resolutions for your consideration. The first one, the sales tax supplemental resolution, is under the sales tax general bond resolution. The second one is the PIT. This is the supplemental personal income tax supplemental resolution. And that supplemental resolution will be supplemental to the general purpose general bond resolution for personal income tax adopted by the authority. Both resolutions authorizes the issuance of $2.3 billion in bonds. However, each resolution provides that if any bonds are issued under that resolution, under the other resolution, the amount of bonds that are issued by both resolutions will be appropriately reduced by that amount. So overall, only $2.3 billion in principal amount of bonds can be issued. As Matt mentioned, the bonds will be issued basically for two purposes: new money purposes and refunding purposes. Matt mentioned the new money piece. I will also add, at least for the mental health facilities, they will include both state projects as well as voluntary agency projects. The voluntary agency projects these are homes that are run by voluntary agencies, whereas the state projects, those are the large mental hygiene projects that are run by the state. The refundings, these will be under the tax law. There are no more advanced refundings, so they will all be current refundings. Current refundings means that the bonds that are being refunded will be redeemed within 90 days of the issue date. The tax law that was adopted by Congress last year eliminated the ability to issue advanced refunding bonds. As far as security, the section 5C for PIT authorizes the deposit of the PIT, 50% of the PIT receipts and 50% of the employer compensation expense receipt into a statutory fund that was created by the state finance law under 92Z. The receipts that are deposited into that fund are held there, and then pursuant to a financing agreement between DASNY and the director of the division of the budget, revenues that are held in the fund are then used to pay debt service on the PIT bonds. The comparable provision also applies to the sales tax bonds. Again, monies that from the sales tax are deposited into a statutory fund, and then pursuant to a financing agreement between DASNY and DOB, the receipts are then funneled into the bond resolution to pay debt service on the bonds. I would entertain questions.
So I'll, as Matt and Cam stated, the supplemental resolutions before you for consideration work in concert. So each is designed to reduce the amount of bonds issued if the other is activated, and the sales tax and PIT programs have very similar mechanics, so I'll talk to you a little bit more in detail about how the supplemental resolutions work. So pursuant to those resolutions, again, the bonds may be issued in one or more series or subseries at one or more times in an aggregate principal amount not to exceed $2.3 billion. The supplemental resolutions are designed to give the Department of Budget maximum flexibility in how the bonds are issued and the instruments that are used to issue. And so it's anticipated that all the bonds will be issued as fixed rate bonds, but they could also be issued as variable rate, convertible, capital appreciation bonds, or deferred income bonds. The supplemental resolutions further provide that all or a portion of the bonds authorized thereby may be sold at public or private sale on a negotiated basis or through competitive bidding, and may be consolidated into a single series of any other sales tax or PIT bonds that are issued under those respective resolutions. The resolutions also delegate to various officers of the authority the power, among others, to designate the series and subseries, if any, of the bonds, and to determine the principal amount of bonds to be issued under each resolution, just so the aggregate doesn't exceed $2.3 billion. The principal amount to be issued as tax exempt versus taxable, if any. The date or dates on which the bonds may mature, provided that no bond will mature more than 30 years after the date of issue. The interest rates on those bonds, provided that the variable rate bonds may not exceed 7.5% per year if issued as tax exempt, and 10% per year if issued as taxable. The purchase price to be paid to underwriters of the bonds if sold on a negotiated basis, provided that it's not less than 90% of the principal amount of the bonds issued. The manner in which the winning bid or bids will be selected and the bonds awarded if they're sold on a competitive basis. The redemption provisions applicable to the bonds, including the redemption dates and prices, which redemption price of any of the bonds subject to redemption at the election or direction of the authority may be equal to a percentage of the principal amount of the bonds to be redeemed, plus accrued interest thereon at the date of redemption. The provisions related to any credit facilities to be entered into in connection with the bonds, whether the bonds will be book entry bonds and the depository for them. The supplemental resolutions also authorize various officers of the authority to prepare and distribute one or more preliminary official statements in connection with the sale of the bonds, to prepare and deliver one or more final official statements, to execute and deliver one or more bond purchase agreements in connection with the sale, or circulate notices of sale for the bonds, execute agreements to provide continuing secondary market disclosure so that we can comply with Rule 15C212, to execute and deliver agreements providing for credit enhancement, and to execute any other documents necessary to effectuate the sale.
Thank you, Robert. Are there questions for us? Yes, John.
On the PIT. First of all, right now, what are the before the tax revisions in this current year, what were the total income PIT revenues to the state? We were pledging 25% of those revenues. Now under this new program, we're pledging 50% of those revenues, up to $12 billion. Is $12 billion at 50%, or is it?
John, that's a good question. I don't know the answer.
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that question, John. You are correct in that before the tax law changes and then the corresponding changes the state made, PIT was set up to have a pledge of 25% of PIT revenues. The holdback provision in the case of non-appropriation was 25% of PIT, the greater of 25% of PIT revenues, or $6 billion. As a result of the changes that were made, we're now looking at 50% of PIT revenues and 50% of the new employer expense compensation tax. So the amount has increased. I think the thought being that you're either going to be paying the taxes through one vehicle or the other. So taken in combination, the two are going to go into the revenue bond tax fund. So taken in combination, that amount has now been increased to 50%, whereas the holdback provision in the case of non-appropriation has now also moved to actually 40% of PIT revenues or the employer expense compensation tax, or $12 billion, the greater of. I believe that's a correct recitation on that. I don't really know the answer to your question because we don't know, I certainly don't know sort of what the expectation is in terms of the use of the new voluntary tax program by employers, but certainly the notion that you are increasing the amount to 50%, is
What makes me
significant.
curious is theoretically, the income tax collections, the tax collections based on income, whether paid by an employer or by an employee, should be roughly the same.
Correct.
Unless there's been some dramatic change in the
Correct.
tax structure in New York State, and I don't
Yep.
read about that.
Yep.
So, in effect, we're doubling the security on this,
Right.
which further limits where the state can go on spending. Otherwise. And the other, it also, when I look at the uses in here, an awful lot of those uses, like $500 million, I believe, for the CHIPS program, all it used to be funded out of direct state operations. That was used to be part of the state budget. They never bonded for that stuff because it was annual basis. So
Bonded for chips for a while.
we have.
Yes.
It's been a
Okay.
long time.
It's been a long time.
Yep.
All right.
Yep. There
I'm
isn't
incorrect.
anything new in the purposes here that are being
They're roughly the
financed.
same.
Yeah.
The two-way did the bonding for chips.
What?
The two-way authority
Yeah.
did the bonding for chips.
Yeah, traditionally, and
They did
we-
okay, so I
and-
just didn't remember it.
Yeah, and we have done the bonding for that program at least a few times.
So, but as far as you're concerned, at this point, there's these funds are not going to be used for things that we haven't, that used to be funded by state appropriations, annual
Yeah,
appropriations.
the
budget
purposes that we are funding here are purposes that we have funded in the past. There isn't anything new here that we haven't otherwise done in other recent financings. But to your point, and again, I would defer to budget. Obviously, they're not here, and with the next meeting, we could probably ask them more specifically on some of the tax issues that they're raising. But the point that you raised, John, is a good one in terms of the fact that it's between PIT and the employer compensation expense tax. It's sort of in one hand or the other, right? You sort of end up in the same place. I think what the provisions also recognize is that there's a new charitable contribution, right? And that if the charitable contribution takes place, that is outside of funds that would otherwise be coming into the revenue bond tax fund. So I think it's a recognition of that. But again, I can't speak to the
That makes some
actual
sense that
numbers.
That's not a predictable number.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yes, Sandra.
Just along that same line, given that there is a fair amount of uncertainty with the new program and how it will work, how is the market going to look at this? What is the assurance that the changes that have been made in the legislation will give the same level of assurance that we previously had that the receipts will be there?
So I think that that the city is still working through these issues in the sense of there are many opportunities and requirements actually for disclosure along the way before anything goes to the market. The financial plan is in the process of being developed and then released. There will be a certain level of disclosure there. There is the AIS disclosure, which, as you know, takes place periodically, quarterly throughout the year. That will take place, probably sometime in early to mid-June. So there'll be another opportunity for disclosure there. And then obviously, if we were to issue the PIT bonds and we would put the disclosure document out, the POS, there would be yet a third opportunity / requirement for disclosure in terms of being able to provide that information to the market. Budget undertakes a process every year where I mean, you know this better than anyone, Sandra, after the budget passes, where they meet with the rating agencies and kind of go through the enacted budget. That process, you know, will take place. I think those meetings are set for next week and the week after, so that'll be an opportunity, you know, to talk about these issues as well as others, obviously, you know, for the budget as a whole. But then obviously we'll have to go to the rating agencies where we issue under the PIP resolution specifically to seek the rating on the PIP bonds, and you know that will be a part of that review process as well.
But I think you're saying at the end of all that process, right now we don't know how it will be received.
So, I mean, I don't think I can say how it will be received, but I think that there is a process in place by which that determination will be made by the folks that are responsible for making that determination.
Well, I think we thought that we could have someone here from budget at a meeting to come.
I was going to ask
It's a
Portia
good one
to try
because
to arrange
there
it.
is a lot of uncertainty here.
I agree.
And
I agree.
accept and understand that you can't say now how it will be received, but I would like to hear more specifics
So
from you.
I don't have any difficulty with the sales tax bonds concept. That, you know, that makes sense. It's nothing, there's been no programmatic changes in that program. The sales tax is the sales tax. I was distressed with this the last
I
meeting,
understand.
two meetings.
You raised it- you
And
raised it
I remain
previously.
distressed on forging ahead in a taxing environment that nobody understands yet, and everybody admits they don't understand it.
Well, I actually have a reservation about the sales tax program. I wonder, I haven't asked the question, but I wonder whether or not that legislation can be unpacked, whether or not it takes effect in 2025. Unless I'm getting that wrong.
What's that out?
The increase in the sales tax revenues
The
set
additional
aside
penny.
from,
The additional penny in 2025?
Yes. takes place in 2025. Well, that's 7 years from now. If the state were to decide that there was some other useful purpose to which that money could be put, is there the possibility that increase gets rescinded?
Always possible.
Right.
Well,
But
that's
I
why I
mean,
asked it that way.
But the program and the rating and the market reception is based on the 1 penny that is pledged now. You know, I think everybody recognizes the notion that we know at some point in the future, 2025, that an additional penny could become available.
Okay. That makes sense, Portia.
Correct.
Right, it's not pledged.
Refresh my memory, do other people issue PIP sales tax bonds?
There are 3 authorized issuers for sales tax bonds, us, ESD, and the Thruway Authority. We've been the only authority, though, to issue those sales tax bonds, as compared to, as you'll recall, on the PIT side, there are 5 authorized issuers, those 3 plus HFA and EFC.
John Gardner.
Yeah, question. Will this be a hard underwriting? Will the underwriters buy these bonds from us and then resell them?
I think, John, you're asking the same question that Sandra is asking, because the underwriters buying the bonds is really is working with the notion that they are going to be able to sell those bonds.
Right. But it's not best efforts. They either buy them or this doesn't go forward.
Correct.
Okay. And will there be a continuing disclosure?
Certainly.
Yes.
Certainly.
Okay.
And, I understand the issues that are being raised, but really to John's point, at least in the first instance, given that we've gone from 25% to 50%, again, I would defer to budget on that, but that certainly seems like a good thing.
Makes sense.
And there's a dearth of bond issuances, certainly in the first part of the year, and presumably on a going forward in the near future. I can't speak to anything else, so that all things being equal, it's hard to believe that there won't be a robust market for it. I mean, again, lots of changes, lots of things can happen, but the market, there's a big demand for them.
Absolutely.
So I'd be surprised if there were a problem, and I'd be surprised if underwriters weren't anxious to get the deal. But I'm just basing that on the market, not on any information at all.
Right. But it's a good point. Volume as a whole in the market is down fairly considerably from last year. Given all the that happened last year with the rush to market in light of the federal tax reform legislation. There was sort of the acceleration of deals that would have otherwise occurred in early 2018 into the late 2017, and then as Cam has referenced, the loss of the ability to undertake advance refundings has had an impact as well in terms of market volume. So I agree with the point that you're making, Beryl.
When will this go to market?
I think budget will bring this to market sometime this summer. Because again, part of the timing here is to the extent that there are current refundings, we're trying to work within that time frame to get them done as expeditiously as possible.
Are there other questions? John?
One more question. The underwriter's discount, is this a projected number in our sources and use? Or could that change, when it's time to actually buy the bonds?
To my knowledge, it's just a projected number.
Okay, all right. But it can't, did I hear in the presentation that they can't discount by, they can't go more than 10%?
More than 10%.
Yeah. So right now they're at 0.48%. There's a lot of room to move. How do we handle that negotiation? Who does that?
So the underwriter's discount is comprised of a number of factors. There's what we would call the takedown on the bonds, for all of the bonds that are sold. There is technically takedown, technically management fee, and then the third component would be other expenses like underwriter's counsel, etc. There is no management fee in the takedown on these. There is no management fee in the underwriter's discount for these state deals. The takedown is actually established via a schedule from the Division of Budget, which lists out by maturity.
Yeah.
So everybody knows up front what that takedown is. So predetermined. And then, the expenses are, sort of depends on the transaction, but it's, usually a fairly small amount.
If the underwriter came back and said, we want a 1%.
So on a negotiated transaction, we stick to the takedown schedule.
Okay.
Interestingly enough, though, in a competitive transaction, basically the underwriters that are bidding on the bonds, they include a takedown, and oftentimes that takedown is very, very thin.
Yeah.
Very, very thin.
I mean, if it's a difference between selling the bonds and not selling the bonds, we probably would not stick to the takedown schedule. Someone would probably get in there and,
There's been no issue to my knowledge really about the takedown schedule. I mean, I think it's a reasonable schedule. It's been adjusted over time. Actually to sort of skinny it down.
Yeah.
But there really has not been an issue on that front.
Okay.
And John, I just wanted to clarify, the limitation that's in the documents is that the purchase price of the bonds can't be less than 90% of the principal amount, which takes into consideration other variables like the discount on the bond. So it does include the underwriter's discount, but it's not limited to the underwriter's discount.
Thank you, Donna.
Thank you. Are there other questions? Hearing none, may I have a motion, please, to approve the transaction? Jerry, thank you. Is there a second? Beryl, thank you very much. All in favor, please indicate with aye. Aye.
I'd like to, I'll vote yes, but I'd just like to record the fact that I'm uncomfortable with the income tax bonds because of the uncertainty in the marketplace and the tax situation here in New York. And I'm very comfortable with the sales tax, and I recognize that there's a need for these. Just like the record show that.
Let's have the minutes will reflect your concern, John. Thank you. Thank you all very much. Oh, did we vote?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yes.
good. With the capital, that's exactly right. Again, thank you all for being here.
Matt, you can stay right there. Okay. We have one resolution to proceed. The transaction is at tab 4 in your book. It is for refunding of municipal health facilities improvement program lease revenue bonds, which were issued for New York City Health and Hospitals Corporation. Matt Bergen will go over the staff report.
Thank you. The staff report provided to members presents a 14-year term for a bond issue in an amount not to exceed $395 million on behalf of the New York City Health and Hospital Corporation, which is a component unit of the City of New York. The financing that you're considering this morning includes the refunding of all or a portion of DASNY's Municipal Health Facilities Improvement Program lease revenue bonds, the New York City issue, Series 1998-1, Series 2001-2, and Series 2008-1 bonds. The security features include the rental payments, the amount of debt service from the City of New York, subject to annual appropriation, as well as a statutory intercept of state Medicaid payments to the City of New York. The expected ratings are AA2, AA-, and AA-. Regarding the New York City Health and Hospitals Corporation, or HHC, they're responsible for the operation of the municipal health system in the City of New York, and as a main element of its core mission, HHC provides, on behalf of the City of New York, comprehensive medical and mental health services regardless of a patient's ability to pay. HHC is the largest public health care system in the United States and operates 11 acute care hospitals, 5 long-term care facilities, 6 diagnostic and treatment centers, as well as hospital-based and neighborhood clinics, and a certified home health agency. HHC provides essential inpatient, outpatient, and home-based services to more than 1 million patients every year in more than 70 locations across the City of New York's 5 boroughs. Regarding the proposed refunding, under current market conditions, it is anticipated to produce a net present value benefit of approximately $51.2 million, which represents 12% of the refunded principal. The debt service payments are structured to maximize cash flow savings for the City of New York's financial plan years, which are the next 4 years, and there are no savings in the out years. DASNY has issued over $1 billion of bonds for HHC under the Municipal Health Facilities Improvement Program, and the City of New York has always made its debt service obligations on time and in full. Mr. Chairman.
Matt, thank you. Are there questions for Matt? Yes, Charlie.
I should have asked you, what does the component unit mean?
It means that it's captured in the financial statements. The city runs, appropriates money, that it's part of the city of New York.
It's not an agency of the city, Public Benefit Corporation.
It is a public benefit corporation.
But they fund it basically through the lease.
You're right.
I don't know, I might get hung up on just a term. I
Good
didn't
question. It's fine.
understand what it really.
Are there other questions? Before I ask for a vote, I have a matter pending before HHC that makes my recusal necessary. So I will recuse myself from this vote. May I have a motion, please, to approve?
And just one
Oh,
note for
sorry.
the record
Of course,
as
Marcia.
well, just from a staff perspective, I've recused myself from this, working on this financing matter as well.
Okay. May I have a motion, please?
Probably
to
not
approve the
necessary, but out of abundance of caution.
transaction? Yes, probably. I'll try a third time. A motion to approve the.
Keep on sitting on that side of the table.
John, thank you, John. Is there a second? Thank you, Beryl. All in favor, please indicate with aye.
Aye.
My recusal noted. And Commissioners as well.
Thank you.
Okay. We are now at the point in the agenda where we will hear the governance report. Chairman Johnson.
Yes, we don't need to go into executive session. The governance committee met yesterday and to fulfill its annual mission of reviewing the staff officer compensation. And we will be making a recommendation at a future meeting that will be consistent with the division of budget parameters for wage changes in that group of people.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Everybody's clear on that we will at some point in the future hear the recommendation? Okay.
And in the meantime, nothing has happened.
That's exactly right. Then we're now down to the management reports. Mr. Vice President.
I can report that I spoke with the president last night. He has nothing to add to his written report, so I don't have to add to his written report. And actually, unless there are specific questions from the members, the other managing directors will stand on their written reports. No additional discussion, so that staff and board can continue their previous started discussions from the board workshop. Ask for executive session, Mike Cusack and Portia Lee also have items to discuss.
Sandra.
I do have a question. On the expansion of the energy performance contracts and program, is that something that we always had the authority to do, or is there some change in the law or action by the board to do
No,
this?
it's expanding our program with the current group.
Expanding it with more people involved,
Yes.
or with what we do?
In the offerings across
The
the board.
approach,
Right.
right?
What is that?
And the
John
existing,
raised this question. with
yeah,
me,
the
and I
existing
didn't know
authority
the
is there to do energy services contract in the act. What they're doing is more of an integrated approach instead of just offering it through TELP or other financing mechanisms to include the construction division in it. And when people are proposing energy savings contracts, offering our construction services where we have the authority to do so. So it's more of an integrated approach.
Yeah, I think it's using all of the tools, offering all the tools to our client base.
In the TELP program, though, those are initiated usually by the hospital instead of primary users. But this sounds like we're going to provide to the marketplace a list of people who are in favored nation status on doing energy improvements, green energy improvements.
We will be, we'll be talking with our client base and telling them what options we have available for it. I mean, we've been progressing energy contracts, for certain clients under, capital appropriations and other financings. We're expanding the approach to bring this forward.
Is there any connection? At one point, I think I was told that NYSERDA is involved in this.
Yes, I mean, they are an option as well, too.
They're an option, but it's not. This work is not being financed by NYSERDA tax revenues.
The release said that we would be partnering with an energy company. That's something yet to be done. We don't have that partnership now.
That's correct. There'll be procurement to determine eligible entities, so it'll be a pre-approved vendor list, much in the same way that we approach vendor issues now for term contracts and other areas.
Would it be like an RFP?
Yes, a formal RFP, correct.
Okay.
So what vision is there on a forward-looking basis for local input from a rural county that may not be too happy about a TELP agreement for some project?
I'm sorry, John, I didn't understand.
I think my question really is that a lot of these energy projects, energy savings and things like that, focus their attention on rural areas where a lot of the people who live there are not particularly enthused about. A huge solar array, windmills, turbines, industrial turbines, and what role will the authority play in listening to neighborhood and local government objections?
I would say that the standard process that applies now will have to be adhered to by the applicant, not by DASNY. So if there's a local permitting framework in place for alternative energy, they have to go through that local permitting process. And in communities that are concerned about this, a lot of that regulation already exists. It's a frequent topic every year on Associated Towns and other statewide organizations to get ahead in regulations, whether it's cell towers or solar or wind farms, et cetera. So it's not an unfamiliar concept. They don't
Still have to
get,
go
they
through
don't,
a seeker process.
That's
right?
correct. They still have to go through
Action
seeker. They have to do all the local, whatever the local process is, has to be complied with as part of the overall project.
But in the current TELP program, when they need to buy a new X-ray machine, they certainly aren't having to do seeker and all that. I mean, that's just all part of the hospital needs that equipment. So this is a different. We're moving into this program, which this makes some sense to me, but we're moving into a broader arena of regulatory affairs.
That could be financed under TELP.
This can be financed under TELP, yeah. It's going to expose us to more work.
With luck, yes.
With luck.
Or more work because of it.
Oh, you mean more burden?
More burden, yeah, better word.
It really would be the applicant's burden, right? I mean, it really would be the,
It is the applicant's burden, and if they're expanding that hospital for the X-ray machine to build a wing on the hospital, they're back in the local
That's
approval
right.
process
We're
away
not,
from us, no matter
you
what.
can't get a TELP contract to build a $50 million X-ray wing. You can only get it for the X-ray.
Get it for the equipment. You're going through regular financing for that, and it would be the same usual process.
Great question, John.
so you would what? You would like, if you're renting solar panels, you would do a TELP lease? How does it work?
It might be TELP, it might be traditional financing, but what it is to integrate the desire to achieve higher efficiency levels and reduce costs and take those savings and under the existing legislation put it back into the cost of the improvement. And there's a lot of interest in that lately. I don't want to say a lot, but there's growing interest in applicants saying,
Potential
and we need
source
help
of-
building this, and we don't want to just trust it to, this 1-800 number, and can you give us some work, help working on it, and that's where the opportunity is, as opposed to going, the manufacturer that says, oh, we'll install it, we'll do it. People want to have some oversight on the other end of the project.
Mike, just for the purposes of this record, it would be great. I know that things around here are happening very quickly, but that bulletin, that public notice that you all sent around was a bit of a surprise for me. Not your problem, my problem, but maybe as these things are done in the future, staff might give us a warning or an outlook, or a lookout, something so that we know it's coming.
When the program's done, we can present it.
Okay, that'd be great.
Give everyone an overview of it, and that was time for Earth Day.
I got it right.
I just want everybody to know that as we're announcing something we're working on Earth Day.
That's a big piece of that puzzle that was gone.
Yeah,
It's timing.
yeah.
It's now complete.
Are there any questions there for any of the managing directors or the vice president? Then may I have a motion, please, to go into executive session to discuss the financial and credit history of a particular corporation and proposed pending or current litigation? Mr. Johnson, before we take that vote, you have a comment.
Well, is this about what we talked about at the last meeting?
Yes.
Oh, well, I do. I don't happen, I thought this was probably for Larry Bolt's conversation.
It will be, but.
That's going to be in there.
It's gonna all
For
be
Larry
in
Bolt's
there.
conversation, I'm willing to be in executive session. So
Okay.
now you're going to ask me to make a contingent vote, like I just did a little while ago.
No, I was asking for a comment before I asked for a
Okay,
vote.
I believe that the matters about reorganization of the dormitory authority are not appropriate subjects for executive session. And if, in the course of that conversation, material comes up, as did what you outlined at the last meeting, what might be, we can go into executive session for that portion of the conversation. But just for the whole thing, I do not believe that it's covered. It should be an open session.
The record will reflect Mr. Johnson's comment. Thank you, John, for making it. I appreciate it.
I guess I'd like, Mike, if you can give your thoughts on that, because I did, it was an issue that I was a bit concerned about last time as well. The content there was a lot of content during that conversation that I thought was appropriate for executive session, although I think it's probably correct that there were portions of it that could have been held in open session. So I'd like your thoughts on that.
Sure. The accepted means for going into executive session that would be used for this, there's two separate ones. The first is to discuss the credit or financial history of a particular corporation. And during the executive session last time, as well as today, we're talking about the credit or financial history of the dormitory authority as a whole. And we are also talking about, in the course of having this discussion, the credit and financial history of the not-for-profit organizations that are authorized to finance and construct through DASNY. So I do think on the first prong, it's appropriate to go into executive session for that reason. But separate and apart from the executive law, also an exception to the open meetings law is to hear advice from legal people, internal and external counsel. And for this phase of the walkthrough, where, in the early stages of where we are, before we formally present anything to the board, we do have Squire, Patton, and Boggs here to help with the walkthrough on the legal issues as they relate to these credit and financial history issues. So it's kind of an integrated discussion. It's very hard to unpack this and unbundle it and keep it separate. And in the end, in my mind, we're trying to get input from the board on where we are, so that we can make a more formal presentation and that includes and a public presentation that includes your input. So I think we'll get there eventually, but there's some things we have to talk about in executive session. So I recommend it. I understand, and it's a legitimate comment for Member Johnson.
That's very helpful.
Thank you.
Other questions? Then may I have a motion, please, to go into executive session for the reasons I've just offered? Thank you very, very much. Second. Beryl, thank you. All in favor, please indicate with aye. Aye. Any opposed? Opposed. Mr. Johnson votes against the motion. The motion passes. We are in executive session. Sorry. Thank you. The record will reflect that the members have just left an executive session, during which no decisions were made other than to return to the public session. Is there any other business to come before the members this afternoon?
Question.
Yes.
What's our next step? What happens next?
Well, I'll have to consult with the people who help me to know the answers to those kinds of questions. But right now, we've got the individual phone calls coming. I don't know that the members have an appetite for another session.
Our next meeting is around June 20th, and that's our audit meeting. And if we can get something brief together for that, we'll try. Let us look at schedules, but it may be a different date.
So we're not definitely looking at board action.
No board action. No board
That's
action.
just what I wanted to know.
And the meeting is still June 20th.
earliest date
For every other reason.
board
yeah,
action.
yes.
Okay, so
I
they're
believe
just, for
is
those of us who'd
planned
like
for
to get
July.
away for a little bit of time.
We're not changing that date.
The earliest date currently proposed for any board action on these proposals is the July meeting.
Okay, I just want to understand
And that's not cast in cement. That's not written in stone. It just depends on how much progress we've made.
Could you update what's left on this, the proposal list that we didn't sort of hit today, just so we have our own scorecard and.
I think we didn't
You
do
mean you haven't
7.
been taking notes?
So we didn't do number 7, the staff report. We didn't do number 8, the DOH approval memo. We didn't do number 9, substantial completion of tax diligence.
Michael, let
go
us
through
know.
it now.
Right,
Okay.
Michael, maybe give us a little.
I'll send you an email or a
And I
summary.
would suggest that they review to the point where the items that don't require board action, that no one has raised an issue with, be deemed okay. Unless we're gonna have
I think I'm
several
okay
more
with
of
that,
these.
but I just want to make sure that
I don't mean at
that
this
we're
moment, but in the
Okay,
future,
all
for
right.
board members to know that if you've not raised a question and it's an item that doesn't require board action, that your
I see.
consent
Got
is
it.
Yes,
Got it, got it, got it.
thank you for the clarification,
so that
yes.
we can
We'll
cross a
handle
few
this.
things off the list.
Yeah, okay. Did we, did I ask for a motion to adjourn? I did not.
No, I interrupted you with a question.
Thank you. May I have a motion to adjourn the meeting?
So moved.
Gerard, thank you. Second. Errol, thank you for the second. All in favor, please indicate with aye. Motion carries unanimously. We are adjourned.